Hello and welcome to the Frameworks tutorial presented by NoCodify. We stress that it's not necessarily a tutorial, but really what we're going to talk about in this video is, what do you need to get started and to get building on Bubble? All right, so these are just some things that you need to be aware of when you're building an application or a business. And in terms of Bubble, the types of things that you need to think about and get ready and get set up first before you really start building on Bubble. Okay, so we have a bunch of text boxes that we'll just show one at a time and then kind of talk through them. So let's get started with the first being hosting. All right, so in terms of hosting, it's provided by Bubble for any application. You cannot export your code off of Bubble and host it yourself. It is vendor lock-in, so it's not necessarily good business practices to be locked into a vendor for any sort of critical mission need for a business. But this is kind of the risk that you're taking by using Bubble. They have given a guarantee that if they go out of business or something happens, they will go ahead and make this open source. So you can take the code then, okay, and self-host it. But for now, while Bubble is a business and it's running, you are locked into using Bubble and having them host your application for you. Okay, so we do get this question sometimes. Unfortunately, you cannot export your code because if you really think about it, you can probably build your application within a month on Bubble. Usually if you try hard every day, you can usually build an application in about a month, maybe 3 months, if it's a complex app. But if you're allowed to, export the code, you would just go ahead, do it, shut off your Bubble plan, and you don't really need Bubble anymore, right? So, the way that, for Bubble's sake, their business model is to keep you having that active plan on Bubble. So unfortunately, at least right now, Bubble hosts it themselves and you cannot self-host. All right, so let's continue. So our next topic here is your domain name, right? So to do this, you can really purchase any domain name off any registrar and then just easily connect it to Bubble. Okay, so again, you would just go in settings, you would go in domain email, and then you would just set up your domain. Now again, you do need a paid plan to set up a domain, and you can start with the very, very first paid plan, which is just the personal plan. Okay, now if you don't want to upgrade to a paid plan, then you'll have to use a Bubble subdomain. So it would be something like your application name .bubbleapps.io. So it doesn't really look professional, right? It's on a subdomain. You're not really picking up any SEO for your own business URL. So, if for a domain, it's good to just upgrade to the first plan and being able to, attach your own domain name. Okay, so again, you can just purchase it off of any registrar that you'd like and then just easily connect it right to Bubble. So the third topic would be payments. So if your application has any payments on it, with most of them do, but some don't. So if you aren't collecting any payments or dispersing any payments, then you can just kind of fast forward. But if you do want to collect payments, if you have a product that you're selling, a subscription, or if it's a marketplace between buyers and sellers, you will need to handle payments. So the one that we recommend most is to use Stripe. Okay, there's a plugin created by Bubble, so you can very easily collect payments and then also distribute payments if you have a marketplace. So the one that we recommend is Stripe, but sometimes you may be in a country that Stripe is not there yet, so you might have to look into other payment platforms. So it really depends on your country, but if your country supports Stripe, you should definitely use Stripe. That's definitely our recommendation there. Another big one to use is PayPal. So this can be in combination with Stripe if you just want to allow your users to pay very easily and seamlessly with PayPal. You can definitely integrate that as well. or you can look into PayPal as your main payment method. So there are plugins for that within Bubble as well to use PayPal. And if you generally prefer PayPal, they do have, Braintree, which is their marketplace platform if you want to have buyers and sellers on your application. So you can use Braintree, which is a PayPal company. And if you don't like Stripe or PayPal and you prefer another payment processor, there are many. There are hundreds others out there, right? So we can't really talk about them all, but most likely what we recommend is to see if there's a plugin for that payment processor in the plugins tab here on the left. Okay, so maybe there's a developer that has created a plugin for that payment processor, but if not, as long as that payment processor that you want to use has API connections where you can quickly make an API call or get an API push, then you can integrate it with your Bubble application. So as long as you can use APIs with that payment processor, you're good to go. So really what we would recommend is Stripe, then PayPal, and then other payment processors. But worst case, as long as you can make API calls, then you're good to go with the payment processor. All right, let's continue on with database. So this is one that's talked about a lot for people that are just starting out in Bubble. So you have really two options here that you should really pick one or the other. So the first is that you can just use Bubble's in-house database. So whatever application you build or you want to build, every application has a database associated to it. So you see here in the data tab on the left, you can build out your database right here and just house your database within your application. This is generally 95% of the route that we suggest for anyone building an application. Unless you have a very edge case scenario, then we would recommend using Amazon Web Services. So with that, there are plugins, or you can simply use the API connector as well to have all your application storage on AWS. Now, if you're using Bubble's in-house database, it actually is in AWS, but it's Bubble that has kind of created that database for you and has allocated all that space, right? So you don't necessarily know where it's going, but you can set up your own AWS instance and kind of push and retrieve data that way. The only reason we suggest using AWS is if your application will be data heavy, meaning users will be contributing very heavy files, right? So with Bubble, they give you 10 gigs of data storage for your application. Now you can upgrade your plans, you can buy more storage space, etc., right? So there are ways to remain using Bubble's in-house database, but have more storage, okay? But it will get costly. So AWS is extremely, extremely cheap. So if you envision your application needing much storage space, then you might want to look into AWS, okay, and not just using Bubble's in-house database. But again, for 95% of use cases, we just recommend sticking with Bubble's database. It's much easier to have a dynamic text box, right? Let's drag this in and say, insert dynamic data, current users, Slack. Okay, it's much easier to use that than to go ahead and retrieve data for the user. All right, so again, we just recommend most likely just sticking with Bubble's in-house database. All right, let's continue on with the email list. So there are two things that you should be thinking about in terms of email collection. First being any sort of marketing campaigns that you want to send out. So if you want to, create nice looking email marketing campaigns, we just suggest using MailChimp. All right. If you haven't heard of MailChimp, just go to MailChimp.com, watch some of their demo videos, but they're pretty inexpensive email marketing provider. Up to 2,000 contracts or contacts is free. So if you're building an MVP or an app from the very beginning, you can have up to 2,000 people on that email list, and you can send them as many emails as you'd like for free. So up to 2,000 So we just recommend sticking with MailChimp in the start, right? If you're past that 2,000 contact list, you can now export that list onto a different provider and look into alternatives. But at the start, MailChimp is most likely the easiest. There is a plugin for MailChimp where simply on sign up, you can just add that user to your MailChimp platform for your MailChimp email list, and then you go on MailChimp.com and easily send marketing emails that way. Okay, so it's a quick API call to just add that user to your MailChimp email list. It's super, super easy. If you want to, go ahead and just look up our MailChimp tutorial, and you'll see how easy it is to just send a user and add them to your email list. All right, but that's for marketing emails. The other thing is, transactional or any sort of app emails. Okay, so something like, if the user forgot their password, you need to send them an email to reset that password. But that email isn't going to come from MailChimp, right? That email is going to come from Bubble itself. So if you go in the settings tab on the left, okay, and then domain email, okay, if you want to go ahead and send emails from your domain, right? Okay, so let's say the user forgot to reset their password. If you want to send them an email from your domain, so something like, app settings at yourdomain.com or no reply at yourdomain.com, anything like that, you will need to set up a domain. And conversely, you will also need to have a SendGrid account. Okay, SendGrid is Bubble's partner for sending emails. So you'll need to go to sendgrid.com, create an account, and retrieve that API key. Okay, and then in the settings, after you set up your domain down here where it says email settings, you can go ahead and specify your SendGrid API key as well as, the email that you want to use to send users emails. All right, so that's for any sort of transactional emails that you may be sending. Okay. And if you don't want to use any of those two, again, there are so many other, marketing platforms. And really, this is only just for marketing platforms because you have to use SendGrid for transactional emails on your Bubble app. So you will definitely need a SendGrid account for that. But if you do want to use other marketing platforms, not just MailChimp, you can look into other plugins. And, again, if that platform has an API functionality, you can go ahead and use the API connector. All right, but again, we just suggest sticking with MailChimp for marketing, and then SendGrid. You have to use those for transactional emails. So definitely get a SendGrid account. All right, and then we'll continue on with live chat / support. So if if you want to have some sort of live chat like we do on our landing page, you can use various different companies and platforms, but the one we suggest is Drift. Okay, they have a free plan. It's a great plan. We're still using the free plan because it has everything we really need in that plan. So we suggest looking into Drift. And then there's also Intercom, which is a little more fancy, has more features, but it's not free. So it's really up to you in what you want for your live chat support. All right, continuing on, we have the mobile app. So if you want to build a mobile app version, right, where the user can download that app on the iOS store or the Google Play Store, you'll need to go ahead and use a third party for this, because Bubble cannot just simply give you the code to export it to Apple developer, okay, or the Google developer account. So you'll need to use a third party source or service, and the one that we recommend is BDK Native. It's by a plugin developer on Bubble. He's been, he has high credibility, he has a great reputation. So if you are interested in learning more about BDK, just go to the Bubble forum and search BDK Native. Okay, and you'll find some topics about it, and it's the service that we recommend. So it's about anywhere from $150 to $300 to get your app in the the iOS store and the Google Play Store. So it's not too expensive to do so. All right, and then the last topic is the bubble plan. So we just recommend using the personal plan when you're starting things out. The hobby plan is nice for you to build your application and to learn Bubble, but it's not a great plan to actually have a real app because you can't have your own domain associated with it. It'll be something like, myapplication.bubbleapps.io. So you're using a subdomain of Bubble, and it just doesn't look professional. So we just recommend using the personal plan when you're starting off. Right, and with the personal plan, you can have many users on the application, but you'll want to monitor how many users you have because at some point you probably will want to upgrade to allow, better performance, better speed, and more storage, really everything, more bandwidth and capacity for your application. All right, so these are the general topics that you just need to think about when you're about to build your application. Some things you'll need to sign up for, create accounts for, so definitely just take a look at these topics and just give it some thought before you start building your application. But other than these topics, everything else is really within Bubble, and you don't really need anything else, at least for an MVP, right? We can't talk about every single application that you can build, but for the most part, these are just kind of the bare bones starting things that you need to think about when you're building any sort of application. All right, so just let us know if you have any questions about any of these topics. All right, thank you.